But that one moment when I opened my phone and saw the Amazon on fire, something clicked in my brain and I thought, climate change is definitely here. And I became very depressed about the state of the world. And more importantly, I was motivated to do something personally about climate change. And that's how I ended up looking into nuclear, because it was one of the solutions. It was arguably the most powerful solution, yet it was the only solution that people were afraid of.
I'm Patrick J. McGinnis, and I coined the term FOMO. That's short for fear of missing out, and it's why some people end up following the crowd when they should be blazing a trail of their own. But if you want to achieve greatness in business and life, you've got to break free. Come on, I'll show you how. This is FOMO Sapiens, where we explore how entrepreneurial thinkers find the inspiration and the courage to build exceptional lives. Welcome back to FOMO Sapiens, the show for bold thinkers who want to turn their FOMO into focus. I'm your host, Patrick J. McGinnis, and today we're joined by Isabelle Boemeke, also known as Isodope, a climate influencer, creative technologist, and now the author of the new book, which is, I have read this one, Rad Future. In this provocative new book, she makes the case that nuclear energy isn't just part of the solution to climate change, it may be the only way to get there in time. Now, she's built a global following by blending art, science, and activism to reframe how we think about tech, energy, and the future we want to build. Welcome to the show, Isabelle.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. So you have a fascinating background. Like, one of the cool things about FOMO Sapiens is that on the show, like, we don't just let people come if they just do one thing. You have to be somebody, right? Somebody does a lot of things. So you've had, I mean, I would call like a unconventional path from modeling to activism to now nuclear advocacy, which is what you write about in your new book. Like, like, how did that happen? Give us the quick and dirty of like, how does somebody do all those things?
It's a different world out there. And I can imagine, by the way, what the teenagers 10 years from now are going to have in their resume, just because of AI and all the different tools, and people can just have 1,000 careers simultaneously. But in my case, it actually began with my modeling career. So when I was 16 years old, I was discovered by a model scout in Brazil, and I was leaving my school. And that was my opportunity to leave the country. And I took on that opportunity and had the chance to travel the whole world. Ended up moving to the United States, where I was located and worked as a fashion model for over a decade. And then one day in 2019, I opened my phone, like lots of us back then, and saw images of the Amazon on fire. And, you know, I grew up with climate change, obviously always knew it was a problem. It seemed like a future problem though. But that one moment when I opened my phone and saw the Amazon on fire, something clicked in my brain and I thought, climate change is definitely here. And I became very depressed about the state of the world. And more importantly, I was motivated to do something personally about climate change. And that's how I ended up looking into nuclear, because it was one of the solutions. It was arguably the most powerful solution, yet it was the only solution that people were afraid of. And when I ended up digging and trying to understand, you know, how nuclear worked and why is it that people were so afraid, I realized it was mostly based on misconceptions. So I took it upon myself to translate all of the boring, dry, complicated science about nuclear into a language that people could understand. And that was the very quick summary of all the activities.
That's, I mean, that you know, you make it sound like very, very logical, that it's just like, okay, here's the straight line. And of course, when you do look in the rearview mirror, like our journeys oftentimes make a lot more sense. You know, as I read about you, there was a great article in the New York Times about what you're up to and sort of how you, I guess, this path you took. And they use the word, which I guess I hadn't heard before, but the word or the phrase climate anxiety. And I guess the point that they were making, and kind of back to what you were saying, is you had this kind of aha moment where you realize like this problem that, of course, we all know about global warming. And, you know, there have been periods where people focused on like the ozone or whatever. And of course, Brazil has always been, as the home of the Amazon and the attack on the Amazon and burning and stuff, it's always been in the conversation. But you kind of had this like visceral wake up call where you said something is different now. And by the way, if you haven't come to this realization, listeners, just like existing in the world and seeing all the crazy stuff that's happening with climate, something has shifted. So climate anxiety is out there. And I guess let's get into why nuclear, because I think, again, nuclear is something that was big in the 80s. I remember it was like a big conversation and, like, banning nuclear. Like, how did it come into your purview that nuclear could be the solution, like the big solution to all of this?
So nuclear on its own actually came into my consciousness about 10 years ago when I saw a tweet by a planetary scientist called Caroline Porco. And in it, she talked about this very specific nuclear reactor design called a molten salt thorium reactor. Like, everybody listening to this now is like, what the hell is a molten salt thorium
Google that.
reactor?
Go Google that.
Yeah, it's exactly. And that's exactly what I did 10 years ago. But the information landscape was so different that it was basically impossible for me, with the very limited understanding I had at the time of nuclear in general, to understand what this specific design was. For some reason, that name stuck with me, and it opened a little door in my brain that was a curiosity I carried for many, many years. So that was 2015. And so if you fast forward to 2019, that moment of the realization that we were not solving climate change as fast as we needed to, the nuclear door opened up again in my brain. And of course, as I started looking into the solutions, nuclear kept coming up. And I decided that was the time for me to actually look and try to understand nuclear. How does it work? When was it invented? What percentage of our electricity supply is it? All of these questions that I would love to understand, but didn't really have the motivation beforehand. And I think anybody who either fears nuclear or is skeptical of nuclear, after they do a deep dive, they come out the other side advocates, because it's so mind-bending. That we have so much overwhelming data at this point. We have over 70 years of operations of nuclear reactors around the world. And so we have so much data on how safe it is, on all these other questions that people have. And so, I came out the other side thinking I have to figure out a way to communicate to everybody about this technology. Because again, as the point I made before, is the general public, if you go ask them what they think about solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, they'll have a positive view of these technologies. And nuclear was the only one that had this gap between what the technology actually is and the public perception.
It's interesting. You got the right guy here today, because I have long been fascinated by nuclear power. Now, why is that? When I was a little kid, my father worked on a nuclear submarine. He was so he did the painting of the external part of the submarine. So, like, that was always just like, Dad went to work on a nuclear submarine. That was just part of our life. And then when I was in, I think, 6th grade, me and my friend Derek won the science fair because we did a whole report about Chernobyl and then what was wrong in the design. And then we did a report about what is a safe design, and we made a model of Chernobyl.
That's amazing. How old were you?
I think I was probably like 10 or something.
That's incredible.
Well, my dad really made the model. We kind of won because of him.
No.
He's very handy. And I remember we actually visited a nuclear power plant in my home state of Maine, this place called Maniakiso, or Seabrook in New Hampshire. Anyway, point being that this was something that I was raised around. And so, like, I had some context. And then the last couple of years, of course, I've been to Chernobyl. I saw that with my own eyes. And then I've read the book Midnight at Chernobyl. I watched the miniseries. But for a lot of people, probably watching that HBO miniseries, which is very well done, but deeply frightening, is probably their first exposure to nuclear. And then, of course, like with that plant in Ukraine and all the fighting around. So, like, it's just kind of interesting how, like you said, the depictions of nuclear power in our culture are deep. It's like only when it explodes. So help us understand the other side of the coin. Like, tell us the positives about nuclear energy.
So first I'll try to explain why is it that our society is so focused on the negatives.
Do it.
And it's a combination of things. First of all is the world was introduced to nuclear technologies through the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's impossible for us living today to understand what a deep emotional scar that left in that entire generation around even the word nuclear, right? Before the bombings, there was this world of possibilities. It could be amazing. We can create all this electricity, but we can also destroy the world. And I think the image of the mushroom cloud was the most important imagery in the history of nuclear, obviously, because it created this very strong emotional reaction to it, negative emotional reaction. And so, as you know, humans, we make decisions based on emotions. But then after the fact, we use logic to justify our decisions. But we actually make decisions based on emotion. And so I have an entire generation that is terrified of even the word nuclear. And so every little incident that happens is going to confirm that fear, right? And so you talk about 3 Mile Island in 1979, which didn't kill a single person. The scientific consensus is that nobody even got sick from being exposed to radiation because the amount of radiation that was released into the environment was so little. And yet it confirmed that previous fear. Nuclear is bad. Nuclear is dangerous. Nuclear is scary. And then you have Chernobyl, again, confirms that fear. Fukushima, again. But if you think about it, you're talking about 3 incidents when in reality, only one of them led to any deaths because of radiation, which was Chernobyl. Fukushima, the deaths that resulted from the accident were actually because of evacuation plans. You have to remember that Fukushima was caused by an insanely large earthquake and tsunami. And so you're, evacuating thousands of people in an area that's inundated after post tsunami and earthquake and so on. And those are 3 incidents in over 7 years of operations. And we have 440 reactors around the world. And so I think to me, the fact that we have such few moments to point to actually talks about the safety of nuclear and not the opposite. But it's similar to airplanes in that people are very terrified of flying because whenever an airplane crashes, it makes into the news. It's a big thing. However, obviously, we know that planes are one of the safest forms of transportation. So now, what are the benefits of nuclear? There are so many. The main one, and the reason why I came into it, was because it can create electricity without creating greenhouse gas emissions or air pollution. So, nowadays, the majority of our plants that create electricity, they do so by burning either coal or methane gas, sometimes oil, but mostly coal and methane gas, to spin a turbine and create electricity. And nuclear reactors or nuclear power plants do the exact same thing, but instead of burning a fuel, it's just tapping into the energy that's inside of the atoms, which is on its own incredible, right? And it's an incredible technology. And it's incredible that humans have been able to do this. But there are so many other benefits. So the second one I would say is nuclear can provide as much electricity as fossil fuels. Nuclear power plants are very, very reliable, but they cause way less harm both to the environment and also to people. So because of the greenhouse gas emissions that we talked about, nuclear power plants do not release these greenhouse gases. And so they're not leading to climate change. They're also not leading to air pollution, which, by the way, already kills at least 4 million people every single year. And then also they take such a little amount of land because the power density of these plants is so high. So they take something like 200 times less land than solar. They are by far the energy source that uses the least amount of land. They provide lots of high-paying, stable jobs. Diablo Canyon, which is California's last nuclear power plant, has 1,200 employees. And these are high-paying, very stable, multi-generational jobs. So there are all these other benefits, not just to the environment, but also to people and the communities, which I think make nuclear such an outlier.
FOMO.
Yeah, and there's another thing that's kind of interesting. I was Googling this while you were chatting because I thought I knew the answer, and I actually was right. So I'm happy with myself today, which is that I think France gets like 65 to 75% of its electricity from nuclear. And like, we never think of France as like a place. I mean, it's not talked about, right? But it's not like, it's not something that when you hear that, you're sort of like, oh, okay, that's interesting. They're using it without incident, right? So one question I have, I'm going to ask some dumb questions now because I think it's important to show like, be a little like, willing to put myself out there. One question that comes to mind is that, okay, great. So America and Western Europe, which are, very advanced industrialized societies, like, okay, I can get on board with the idea that nuclear is safe there. But what about in places that are in, where they're they are not developed countries where maybe you don't have the same level of professional or scientific talent or infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. Like, is nuclear for everybody, or is it only for the countries that kind of have the infrastructure to be able to make sure that it's really safe?
That's an understandable argument, I believe. And even in the case of Fukushima, right, this accident happened in Japan, which is
Yeah.
arguably one of the most civilized countries and technologically forward. So that's an argument that people do have. I think what's cool about nuclear is that, let's say I am a country like Ghana, which is actually trying to develop a nuclear electricity program. I'm not just going to go and build a nuclear reactor, right? That's a base of knowledge that would take decades to develop, and it would be extremely expensive to develop on your own. And it's not like you can just go online on Amazon or, you can't buy this sort of stuff that goes into a nuclear reactor online. And so the way they do that is they approach the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is this international organization that has two missions. One of them is to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And the second one is to advance the peaceful uses of nuclear, like electricity production, but also, isotopes for medical research and also cancer treatments. There are several other uses for nuclear technology that are peaceful. And so this International Atomic Energy Agency, they then help a country like Ghana develop their nuclear program. And this includes things like a regulatory body. It includes things like training a local workforce and then also international collaboration. So the most likely outcome is not that Ghana would build their own reactor design, is that they would partner with the United States, for example, and have the United States sell their technology, export their technology and expertise in building and operating the plants. And this is effectively what's happening. But the bad thing that's happening right now is the big player that's exporting their nuclear technology is not the United States. It's actually China or Russia.
That's not surprising. I mean, it is what this really says to me. It's like, is that if this requires like cooperation, and this is one of these things that if we all agree this is important, it actually increases collaboration across countries. And so it's important for the countries like the US or countries from Western Europe, if they want to still be in the game, they're going to lose out to China and Russia and other players if they don't sort of wake up, because the rest of the world can still do this. Like even if we don't want to do it, like they're going to move forward. Like that's how the world works. And so it's like our
By the way,
policymakers need
they
to pay
are
attention.
doing it already. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt, but they're already
No.
doing it.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Let me see another dumb question, or maybe not dumb, but okay. So sounds good. Love it. But what about bad actors? What if somebody goes to the nuclear power plant and uses it to make a bomb?
That's one of those scenarios that are like, what if the sun explodes? And, so nuclear power plants are very heavily guarded, first of all, right? So it's not like you can just show up at a nuclear power plant and go inside. But even if that wasn't the case, let's just say you find a way to get in. Realistically, how can you make a bomb? The biggest concern with weapons proliferation is actually not in the reactor that's operating. It's in the uranium enrichment phase, which is basically the uranium that we find in nature is not quote unquote radioactive enough for us to be able to use in a nuclear power plant, and much less to make bombs. So for us to be able to use in a nuclear power plant, we have to enrich that uranium, meaning we have to make it slightly more radioactive. And just to give you a number, to enrich for nuclear power plants, you have to enrich to up to 3 to 5%. For bombs, you need to enrich for up to 90%. So it's a huge difference there. Most countries that develop a nuclear electricity program, they don't have enrichment capabilities. This is something that's very limited, and that the International Atomic Energy Agency, because one of their missions is to decrease the amount of weapons in the world, they make it very, very hard for countries to have that capability. And then the other risk really is in the spent fuel. So you have the uranium fuel that goes into a reactor to make electricity. Once it comes out, it's called spent fuel. And then theoretically, you could separate that waste to get the plutonium that's inside of it. But again, this is an extremely technologically complex process that is most of the cases it's just too expensive and not worth it for a country to pursue. And so while the reactor is running, it's basically impossible because nobody can go into the reactor, to grab the fuel, take it out to make a bomb. That they would die because when the reactor is running, that fuel is so radioactive, they would die. So those are the main concerns. And again, it's extremely expensive. They would have to be a country that's hell bent on developing nuclear weapons. It can't just be a person or a small organization. This is something that's going to take billions and billions of dollars. And so, I think the concerns about weapons are slightly overblown, and I think the data backs this up. So, for example, there are 31 countries around the world that have nuclear electricity, and only 9 of these countries have weapons. And out of those 9, 7 of them already started with weapons. They developed electricity later. And then, the countries that did develop weapons, like North Korea or Israel, which nobody knows for sure, they did so illegally. They didn't pretend to have a nuclear electricity program. They just went and built weapons.
It makes sense to me what you're saying. I mean, if I step back and I think it's sort of like you said, it's very hypothetical. Like if I were hell-bent on creating a lot of havoc, like I could just buy a bunch of drones and it would, that's what we're kind of learning now is like the kind of time and energy to put into something like this. By the way, you're probably going to blow up the entire world, including yourself. Like it's just not probably the ROI on that time and energy, not to put it in deeply like transactional terms, but it's different. Like it doesn't justify the fear, especially vis-a-vis the risk of, climate change and what it's going to wreak upon our lives. So let's turn to the other side. I want to go to let's talk about the positive side. So give me the vision for the rad future. What does it look like if we get our act together and actually, implement this type of power?
It's funny because I made an AI video because everybody said, what is a rad future?
Yeah.
And, I can use all the words, but I think making a video was very impactful. And what I realized at the end of writing the book was what I imagine a rad future is a future of energy abundance for all, not just people in developed countries, which is what happens right now, where we can use technology to actually become closer to one another and closer to nature. So in my video, I have a little snippet of a man, tending to his garden, and he has a little drone that follows him around, and it's able to water the plants, and he has a little device that he can stick into the ground, and it reads the pH levels and if it needs any nutrients. And that to me is an example of you still have that connection to nature. Humans are still doing things, but we're using technology and, electricity, which underlies technology, to just have a better world. And going back to the point of, why is nuclear better? I also think ideally we can move towards a world where all of our technologies are moving towards the direction of causing less harm, both to people, to the planet, and just increasing the amount of resources that we need to be able to operate them.
FOMO.
Now, this is something that obviously you have a deep vision on this, and you have a vision of the future there's a positive vision around nuclear. I know there's some people, obviously, like this is a fractious, conflictual topic. There are people on the other side who also would say that they just disagree with you, and that's just the debate. You are using we're not here to get into that today. I think it's more important that we understand some of the topics that we just got into. But what I do want to talk about, which is way more interesting, is how you communicate, because you've chosen through the form of social media, and everybody go check out Isodope. It's cool. You have this kind of interesting vision around video and education, but it's also super visually impactful. And you've kind of created this avatar of yourself, and you're doing all this really you're bringing together a lot of different things. Talk about how you decide what you're going to do, what's the impact of it, and what you've learned as an activist in the process of building out that channel.
So when I started posting videos about nuclear, which was 5 years ago, I knew that if it was just me sitting down in front of a camera, wearing a t-shirt and saying, let me tell you why nuclear is great, people would have scrolled right past, right? Mm-hmm. So I wanted to do something very eye-catching and unusual. And I almost wanted to make content that people couldn't look away from. Mm. That's where the whole idea of Isodope came from. I wanted it to be a character. I wanted it to have a specific aesthetic, a futuristic aesthetic, sometimes retrofuturistic, because a lot of the elements of nuclear are also retrofuturistic, right? The atomic age happened in the 50s, 60s, and so it has that aesthetic, that very specific aesthetic. So I wanted to reference back to that, but then also to the actual future. I also wanted to make fun and non-threatening. I wanted for people to look at it and think, oh, this sounds interesting and easy to understand. So I use colorful fonts and easy graphs. So much of my communication is visual because I was trying to elicit an emotion, going back to people react emotionally to things. What I've learned is that you don't even, if you want to make content, which by the way, I think everybody who has an idea that they want to share should be making content because it's the easiest way to reach out to folks and to change minds. But also if you do want to make content and you're sure about that, one of the ways you can go about it is just dropping little fun facts that open people's minds. So I'll give you one fun fact. I don't know if it's fun fact, depends on who you ask, but you talked about the show Chernobyl earlier.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I like to tell people is that have seen the show is maybe the most dramatic scene is when these three guys that work at the Chernobyl power plant, they go down to the basement to open a valve on a so-called suicide mission. Well, those three guys actually did exist and they did go on this mission to the basement. One of them was still alive in 2024. I don't know. He's alive today. And the other two died of completely unrelated causes decades later. And so there are so many things like that about nuclear. That's all you need to share. And people will, just like that tweet about molten salt thorium reactors stuck in my mind. It will stick in their mind and then they'll go and learn for themselves. Because I think nowadays the information environment is such also that people need to go and learn for themselves instead of being fed all the information. So I think social media is an amazing tool. If you're artistically inclined, you can use so much visual language to communicate your ideas and don't overthink it. Just start sharing little tidbits of information.
Yeah, that's actually really good advice. I mean, it's about making something people want to see that they can't look away from and combine it with a counterintuitive insight that then gets them to say, oh, this person is giving me value today, something I didn't know before. They're helping me think more deeply or shift my thinking, is so much of what the stuff that works on social media. We all think it's just like yelling and screaming, but like that stuff, I don't know. That's not what I want to do. Doesn't sound like it's what you want to do. And so it's a way more positive vision. The funny thing about your example, by the way, about Chernobyl is the part I remember from the movie, a good friend and I have both talked about this because we've both been to the plant, is when they're shoveling the graphite and they're trying to move it out, which is, by the way, that is super deadly. And so the expression, when something really bad is happening now and I have to deal with it, I call it shoveling graphite because I'm like, this is Grant, I mean, this is not a fun moment, but obviously it's not going to kill me. Now, Isabelle, I want to go onward now to the next part of our show, which is what's called the FOMO 4. I'm going to ask you 4 questions and I want 4 quick answers. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, good. Number 1, what's the best investment you've ever made in yourself?
Short, quick answers. The best investment I've ever made in myself was learning how to learn. Somewhere along the way, I started reading science books, popular science books, and it trained my brain on how to learn new topics.
That's a good one. Nailed it. Boom. Okay, number 2. What's your favorite use case for ChatGPT?
It's actually buying products that you need a list of links for. So I was buying a comforter and I wanted a very specific warmth comforter. And so I asked ChatGPT to make a list of the best rated ones. And it was incredible.
That's a great one. Yeah. It really helps with shopping. I've used some of that before too. Number 3, what's a non-obvious habit or practice that helps keep you focused?
Non-obvious. Mm-hmm. Having a fidget toy. Maybe this is obvious for a lot of people.
No, not at all.
But I definitely am slightly ADHD, and so I need to have something in my hands to distract my brain. Almost it helps me be focused.
Okay, I have something for you. Go look this up on the internet. It's called an Ayurvedic ring, and it was given this by this. It's good. It's like almost acupressure for your fingers. You move this ring up and down, and it's got pressure points on it. It's a great fidget tool.
Okay, I think I know what you're talking about, but I should definitely get it.
Those things I give them out as gifts because I find mine is like it's very good for just focus, but also it like moves things inside of you. It's just
so you do that stuff as well. You use the fidget toys.
Heck yeah!
Okay.
I mean, I invented FOMO. I have ADHD tendencies coming on my ears, so I have to do all kinds of stuff. Final one. If you could convince the world of one truth about the future, what would it be?
The one truth about the future is that it's entirely up to us to create the future that we want. And so I think that everybody should take personal responsibility in creating a positive view of the future and then going and working on it.
I totally agree. That's a good one. All right. Everybody, before we wrap up, where can people find your stuff? I mean, we know it at Isodope, as I assume that's on Instagram and TikTok, but where else can we find you?
Instagram, TikTok, and X as well. Or they can go on isodope.com, which is my website. Or they can go on my personal social media, which is my name, Isabelle Boemeke. And that's all they need to know.
All right. So if you like what you're hearing, there's not a shortage of places where you can follow Isabelle for all of the stuff she's doing. The book is called Rad Future. It's out now. Isabelle Boemeke, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And everybody, if you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share FOMO Sapiens with your friends. And remember, FOMO is real, but the power to master it is yours. FOMO Sapiens is recorded in New York City and can be found on YouTube at FOMO Sapiens or on your favorite podcast network. Theme music is by Mike McGinnis, editing and post-production is by Josh Elstro, and the show is produced by Matt Curtis and me. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and share it with your friends. And as always, you can find more about the show and me at FOMOSapiens.com and PatrickMcGinnis.com.